Friends, welcome back to this lecture number 11 on the course on human behavior. Now, what we are going to do in this particular lecture is we are going to see another complex human process which defines our behavior, and that is language thought. So, the basic of this lecture and the upcoming lecture will be on how language and thought make a complete whole in terms of understanding human behavior, or the part played by these two processes, which are advanced cognitive processes, in determining human behavior. So, before we jump into what is language and what is thought and what is the role of language and thought in understanding human behavior, as we have been doing in the other lectures, let us quickly summarize what we have done up till now. This course is a 20 lecture 8-week capsule, where what I will do is I will take you to the very basics of studying human behavior. The first two lectures, what we are trying to do is we are trying to explain the science of psychology, which is the basic of all human behaviors. What we did was we looked at how we studied human behavior and what is the need of study of human behavior. We also looked at several techniques of studying human behavior. So, we started off those lectures, the introductory lectures, by looking at the history of human behavior, starting off with the philosophical roots and the physiological roots, and then looking at the history of the science of psychology, not limiting to structuralism and functionalism, but also including behaviorism, gestaltism and psychoanalysis. We also looked at newer schools of psychology, for example, psycholinguistics, cognitive neuroscience, and towards the end of this series, we looked at how experimentation is done in psychology. What are the methodologies that psychology has for studying human behavior? We looked at in laboratory experiments, out of the laboratory experiments, we looked at observations, correlations, we looked at things like literature review, all these methods of how to collect data and how to study human behavior. Then we moved on to the second process, which is sensation, which is taking up information from the physical environment and converting it into something that can be encoded in the psychological domain. So, we looked at the properties of systems and processes which acquire information from the physical environment and convert it into the psychological domain. Two properties of interest: sensitivity. So, we looked at the details of what is sensitivity and what it comprises of, and we looked at sensory coding, the biological process through which this information from the environment is coded into the psychological domain. Towards the end of this lecture, we looked at the idea of how this functions in terms of a model system. So, we took I as the model system and we deciphered how the I makes sensation or converts the physical stimulus into the psychological domain. The physical stimulus of interest here being the light particles, which is photons. The next section was on perception, where we looked at how meaning is acquired from this physical stimulus that has been encoded through the process of sensation. 5-part process is what comprises of the perceptual processing. This includes attention, which is focusing on what stimulus to read; localization, deciding where an object is in the external environment; recognition, the process of pattern matching, where we take in an external stimulus which has been encoded by sensation into the psychological domain and match it to pre-saved or saved representations, mental representations that are already in the brain. The process of abstraction, where we extract useful features from stimuluses or organizations, mental representations which has been encoded through sensation. And the last is constancy, which is maintaining the constant, or which is acquiring a constant, acquiring a fixed value, or acquiring some fixed positions based on which interpretations have to be done. We moved on to the idea of learning and conditioning, where we looked at how learning and conditioning, these two processes go along and what role does they play in study of human behavior. So, we started off by looking at what is learning. We looked at two basic kinds of learning, which is the non-associative and the associative form of learning. Within the non-associative, we had sensitization and habituation, and within the associative form, we looked in detail the classical conditioning, the various parameters of classical conditioning, several other things which are in classical conditioning, factors affecting classical conditioning, how it progresses, how it can be controlled, and so on and so forth. We looked at operant conditioning, which is another form of associative conditioning, where we looked at the parameters of it, features like extinction, features like spontaneous recovery, features like conditioning, factors affecting operant conditioning, and so on and so forth. And lastly, we looked at something called observation learning, which is another form of associative conditioning, and we looked at how it progresses, what are the various parameters of it, and so on and so forth. The last two lectures were focused on memory, where we looked at how information which has been learned through the process of learning is stored somewhere. So, we defined memory as a three-part process where an encoding is transferred into some kind of a storage and later on retrieved at some point of time for some verification or some kind of a use. And so, initially we defined two models of memory, the Atkinson-Shiffrin model, which talks of memory as a three-part store connected by a serial processor, and the processing happening through active processes like attention or rehearsals. So, that is what we were actually doing, or that is what we were actually talking about in the first part of the lecture on memory. In the second part of lecture of memory, we took on several variables. We looked at the idea of working memory, and we looked at how does working memory function, the various parameters of working memory. We looked at what is long term memory, how does long term memory function, parameters of long term memory, then types of long term memory, what kind of information is stored in long term memory, and a whole other kind of informations and a number of information which is related to human memory. So, up till now we have dealt with these sections and these processes of psychology, these parts of psychology which help us understand any human behavior, because any human behavior has all these parts integrated together. Any behavior that you see has sensation, has perception, has learning, has memory. From today onwards, we will be moving on to the higher processes, right, and today will be a set of lecture where we will be ending our study of higher cognitive processes and moving on to some abstract terms like emotion, personality, and social influences, which are also part of studying human behavior or part of the study of psychology. So, today's lecture, what we are going to do is we are focusing on something called language and thought process. Now, before we acquaint you to what language is and what is the role it has in terms of understanding human behavior or explaining human behavior, let me start off by how language helps us in understanding human behavior. So, during the 1960s, people in mostly in the European countries and the United States, they were fond of jogging and they started jogging a lot, and so this whole health gamut came up and a lot of people started doing jogging at all points of time, and therein came the idea of something called runner's high. Now, runner's high is a system or is a state where people who actually jog a lot, they feel heightened, or their body system, their homeostasis goes to a high, they feel high. Now, it was believed that the question was, why were these runners who were not taking any drugs as such, why were they feeling high similar to this high which was similar to other drugs which were available in the market. And so, a systematic hypothesis was created, and this hypothesis was tested on using biological methods, where it was found out that the body releases certain kind of endorphins. These endorphins are very similar to external drugs which actually raises or gives you a certain kind of a high. Now, initially this was what the proof was, this was what the test was, and so people around the world started believing that the body produces its own drug, own self stimulating or self activating system. Later on, a lot of study was done and it was found out that these endorphins had no role whatsoever to play in the runner's high. What our interest is through this experiment is to show how language, thought and thought processes actually help you solve problems or study human behaviors. So, initially the runner's high, which was thought to be, or runner's high that people were feeling, that was through a process of thinking. It was related to the idea that it was produced by the body itself, or this was similar to morphine, to the idea of how external drugs actually give you a high. And through a well structured hypothesis testing or a scientific method of thinking and problem solving, it was labeled that these toxins or these activating drugs like morphine, a drug similar to morphine, was produced by the body, a natural system of the body, and these drugs were named as endorphin. Later on, with the testing and well thought experiments, it was found out that endorphins, which are similar to morphine or the drug which hyperactivates you, this had no role to play whatsoever, and through process of language it was explained how these things are different. So, this is the role of language, because language is a very basic property that humans share. Now, there is a difference between language and communication. Communication is a medium of exchange of ideas between two human beings or two beings as for that matter. Now, why I am not using the term human beings is because we differentiate ourselves from animals, saying that we are human beings and they are animals, but that is a very narrow way of looking at it, because we also are animals. Now, the thing is, communication is a medium of exchange of ideas. Now, these ideas could be very primitive ideas. For example, it could be ideas similar to what honeybees do to show the rest of the honeybee. So, if a honeybee finds a flower or nectar from a flower or patch of flowers, what it does is it returns back to its own nest and then does a particular kind of dance, and this dance tells sends two or three information or communicates two or three informations to other honeybees. One being that it has found a source of something, it could be nectar, it could be water, and where it is, which direction it is, and that kind of information is shown by this honeybee dance, which looks like an infinity dance. Similarly, other primary organisms like whales, bears, bird songs, birds, these are all communicating mediums, and so communication is basically a process, a medium of exchanging ideas between two groups of people or two groups of organisms. Language is a little bit different. Language is that property which is acquired only by human beings. Language is something which is not present in other forms of animals. Now, animals do have a form of language, but it is very, very poor, and so they cannot articulate, they cannot speak, they cannot actually exchange ideas or exchange many dimensional ideas among themselves. So, that is one difference between language and communication. So, communication is a medium of exchanging ideas, and language is more than medium of exchanging ideas. You can produce many forms of vocalizations, produce thought processes, produce many other things, or many other communicate a lot of ideas through it. So, let us then begin our discussions on language and thought and look at what is language, what are the basics of it, and how does it actually progress. So, as I was saying, let us start looking back at what is language and try and introduce to you what is language and how it is different from communication, and what the role does language play in studying human behavior. So, language is known to be a primary means of communicating a particular thought. Any idea that we have as human beings, any idea that we have we communicate through the use of certain language. And so, these language are well formed sounds or well formed words and sentences which we express, and other people hear, or other people express and we hear, and that is how we communicate certain ideas or certain facts. Now, these ideas could be a warning, it could be a compliment, it could be any kind of thing. So, whole lot of things can be communicated through certain languages. Now, there are two levels of language. As we looked at, language has two different aspects. Now, every language, be it German, be it French, be it English, be it Hindi, any language which is there. So, language is basically a structured way of using symbols, certain symbols to communicate certain ideas. And so, what you should know is that the symbols used in language has no direct relation to the idea which is being communicated through it. So, it is an arbitrary relation, right. And so, the same idea can be communicated by multiple languages and multiple symbols, and so there is no relation between the language, the symbol that you are using to produce a language and communicating the idea. So, same idea or the same speech can be expressed through a sign language, it could be expressed through English, Hindi and many different languages. Now, most languages have two aspects to look at or two aspects to worry about. One is the production and the other is the comprehension. So, not only do humans produce a language, they can also comprehend a language. Now, producing a language is equivalent to actually verbalizing a particular thought or verbalizing a particular communication. So, human beings at one end, they start communicating, they start producing using these symbols, forming a chain of thought, and then not only chain of thought, passing this information. So, when we are producing language, what we are actually doing is we start off from the bottom up process. We think of a particular idea, then from that idea we comprehend that idea and then try and break it down into a form of communication, a form of symbols, and then we look at how these symbols would be arranged by a particular grammar, and then we produce these symbols and then we communicate. This is one way of actually looking at language from the production point of view. From the comprehension point of view, the reverse is true. So, somebody produces certain language, we comprehend at the level of where the symbol is being produced, then look at how the symbols are arranged, look at the grammar of how they are arranged, take up the basic ideas, and from that basic idea they come up with a thought that is being communicated to us. And so, the processes are reversed. So, basically the language that most of us for us which is valid is the English language. Now, if we look at the English language generally has 40 different phonemes. Now, it's believed that the number of phonemes which are present in the world is approximately 200, but the English language is known to have something called 20 different phonemes. And what these phonemes actually do is that these phonemes, the basic speech that anybody can produce, any human being can produce. Now, this can be, the basic phonemes can be as simple as so, the B phoneme, which is the B in the boy, or the T phoneme, which can be the T in the toy. So, the basic speech sound that human beings produce is what is the phoneme, and in English language these are 40 in numbers. Now, it is amazing that these 40 phonemes, when they are combined together in different combinations and permutations, this can actually lead to 70,000 different words, and when these words, when they combine together, they can produce millions of sentences which are there. So, the human language that we know, the English language that we know, starts off with 40 phonemes, which in its arrangement can produce a large number of words, which produces a even large number of sentences. The whole English language or the whole written English language is basically dependent on the 40 different phonemes which are out there. Now, production of a language begins with a thought which is translated into a sentence and ends with a sound expressing that sentence. As I said, the production part of a language, when you speak, so if this is your mouth, if you are speaking, this production starts with a thought process. So, you think of something first and then you translate that into some type of a sentence. Now, this sentence is how the arrangement of the symbols will be there. So, sentences are what? Sentences are certain arrangements of symbols. For example, look at A. Now, A is a symbol which is similar to A in the Hindi language. Now, both of them are similar, but both of them are AM, and look at this, both of these symbols point towards the fruit mango, right. It could also mean common in Hindi, but if we translate that, that is what it is. So, this spelling and this spelling corresponds to this fruit. So, basically how production of language begins is, it begins with the thought process and then it is translated to some kind of a sentence, which is basically the arrangement of these symbols, and then ends with producing sounds expressing these sentences. So, first these sentences are there and these sentences are then spelled out. You actually go ahead and spell out this language with the combination of certain phoneme. For example, the boy is weak. If this is what we are thinking, if we are thinking of a weak boy, if we see a weak boy and if you want to comprehend that, or if you want to produce this sentence for or want to express this sentence to other people, what we will do is we will produce a sentence like this, and this sentence then is translated back by reading it. For example, the boy is weak, and if you look at it, it will be in terms of the phoneme. So, boy is weak. This is how it is translated. So, this in terms of the basic speech sound. Now, in terms of comprehension, what happens is comprehension of a language begins by hearing the sound. So, in comprehension, in understanding, in hearing, or in understanding the meaning which somebody else has produced. So, understanding the meaning of a sentence which somebody else has produced, you start off by hearing the first sounds, then attaching meaning to the sounds. So, every word, for example, the word bank. Now, depending on the context, this bank will have different meaning, and so this attaching of meaning is important. And from once you have attached the meaning, you attach meaning to the combination of words and a sentence, and then it leads to the final thought process or the idea that is being generated or being thrown at you. Language and communication. So, language, units and processes. What are the basic units of language, or what are the basic parts of language, and how do they help in communication? What are the processes in language? So, language is structured at 3 different levels. Most language, written language, is structured at 3 different levels. We have the level of speech sound, we have the level of word, and we have the level of sentence. These are the 3 levels which are there. So, we will look at the 3 levels one by one. Let us start with the speech level or the level of speech sounds. Now, speech is a sequence of phonemes, shortest segment of speech that carries meaning. So, at the level of speech, language can be expressed in terms of phones. These are the basic speech sound. For example, B, D, E, these are the basic sounds. Now, if you ever pick up a dictionary, you will see that these are definition that you have of any word, you will see the basic phonetics of it. So, these basic speech sounds are called phones, and the combination of these phones together is what is called the phoneme. So, each language has certain phones, certain basic sounds, and these sounds when they combine together to form larger sound. For example, ba, in bat, B and A. So, 2 phones combined together, that is called a phoneme. The idea that 2 speech sounds combine together to form a phoneme. So, shortest segment of speech that carries meaning, and when phonemes are combined together in right way, we perceive them as words. So, when the phonemes are combined together in right way, for example, if we combine these phonemes together, we get the idea of a boy, or we get the word of a boy. Now, speech generally is perceived to be continuous. Most people when they talk, you think that I am talking in a continuous manner, but if I do a spectrography of this speech, if I measure the pressure or the way air is flowing out of my mouth, you will see that speech is a non-continuous thing, and so it's not actually the way I am speaking is not continuous, it's broken down into its part. That's what it's believed to be. This continuity, it comes through the idea that these phonemes are together or they are placed together. Now, the use of phoneme or the usefulness of phoneme can be understood by this particular example. So, in a boy, if I replace the phoneme B by the phoneme T, boy now becomes toy, and so what happens is the concept is changed, the idea is changed, and that is the power of a phoneme, or that is the use of a phoneme. Now, again what I will suggest is, if you want to go into details of how language works, you should be referring to my lecture on cognitive psychology, where I have done an extensive lectures on what is language and how it is produced and what is the usefulness of it. So, what we will do here is we will just look at the basics of what is language and how does it help in understanding human behavior. So, basically these phonemes, they combine together to form words, or to form something called morphemes, which again combine together to form something called words. So, before we go into the word unit, there is something more that you should be able to understand. First, we are very good at discriminating among different speech sounds corresponding to different phonemes, but poor at discriminating among different sounds corresponding to the same phoneme. So, if we look at different phonemes, we are very good at discriminating among different phonemes, right, but when we are discriminating speech sounds within the same phoneme, so phones within the same phoneme, we are very poor at doing that. For example, look at the word pin. Now, if you look at pin, this is how it is written, P-I-N. If the same phoneme or same word is now written as spin, and the phoneme that we are interested in is P. Now, when you pronounce pin, you will look at, or you will see that the phoneme P comes out with a puff of air. Take your hand, place it in front of your mouth and try saying pin. When you pronounce the word P, a puff of air comes in, but when the same phoneme is included in a different word or different morpheme or word in this case, then when you produce the P phoneme in spin, there is no puff of word. So, we are very good at discriminating within the same phoneme, discriminating phones within the same phoneme, but when it comes to discriminating in other words, it is a little bit difficult, or it is a little bit problematic. Now, different phone is why we cannot understand different foreign languages. Now, what happens is, when we are learning another language, when we are learning different languages, different foreign languages, each of these foreign languages different phonemes or different speech sounds, and that is one reason why it is very difficult for us to learn other foreign languages or different foreign languages. Now, look at the way bus is spelled. Now, English people would call this as bus, but if you look at German, they will say this as Bus. They do not have the us, the strictest form of S and U, and so they will say this as Bus, Zug, and so the phones are different, or they do not have the Z word, the S word is not pronounced in too much of German. So, you will have things, that is how the pronunciations are, right. And so, since different languages are different phonemes, and since we do not know these phonemes, those speech sounds, it is very difficult for us to understand different foreign languages. For example, the word P, right, is pronounced in two different ways in the Hindi language. The same P, if we pronounce the phoneme P in English language, it is pronounced in the same way, but if we pronounce the phoneme P in Hindi, there are two different ways of pronouncing the same speech sound. Also, the idea that different languages are different phoneme, and because of that different phonemes make language learning difficult. Another example of this is that the R phoneme and the L phoneme is approximately same in Japanese, and that is why rice and lice are pronounced similarly or thought of similarly. So, lice is what they say for rice as well as lice, right, L-I-C-E or R-I-C-E. Most Japanese people will pronounce it in the same way, because they do not have a different phoneme for the R and the L. Also, what is the usefulness of phoneme? What is the need of phoneme? Now, another usefulness of phoneme is phonemes actually tell you what words cannot be possible. For example, the word bet. Now, bet is possible in English language, but then the English language says that you cannot add a B after a P phoneme. That is an incorrect way of speaking English, or that is not allowed. Now, if I put a P before a B and English language does not support it, I will get a word like febat, which is actually not a word. And so, these kind of non-words are also a part of how phonemes decide language, or phonemes basically help you in understanding language. With the help of phonemes, it can also be explained that words like zook, which are a non-word, if I want to make a plural of this, we will say zooks. That is the plural, because this is a non-word. And so, the idea is that phonemes also help us decide for what words can exist, what plurals can exist and what cannot. But if we have a word like zug and this word, now we know that the plural will turn out to be zooks. So, we will have a z kind of a plural, but in terms of a zuk, which is a non-word, the plural will be a s. Now, Zug is actually a train in German, and so that is possible. So, phonemes also help us decide what kind of plurals or what kind of words can exist and what kind of words cannot exist. So, this is the level of, at the level of the speech sound, at the level of the phoneme, how these phonemes actually help us in understanding language or making language. The second unit at which language works, a second unit of production of language or comprehension of language, is at the level of word unit. So, we have just seen that different phonemes, basic speech sounds or phones for that matter, combine to produce something called words. Now, even before we produce words, there are also some kind of words which are called suffixes and prefixes. For example, the word ly or un. Now, these are also words, although they do not convey full meaning, but then when put in front of a word, it actually changes the meaning of it, and this is what is the level which we call morpheme. So, what we are doing here is that two different phonemes L and Y, they combine together to form a word which is called ly. Now, on itself ly does not have any meaning, but this is a suffix, because the moment we add ly to the word time, it says timely, which basically means that time is a word and timely means that an action which is being done on time, a repetition action. Similarly, a prefix such as un, if you use this un before time, it will become untimely, which is the negative of time or negative of not being on time. And so, these basic word sounds or these basic words which actually are combination of certain phonemes, but which are not true words, also help us in producing languages, and these are what are called morphemes. So, these small words, combination of phonemes which are exactly not full words, are called the morphemes. So, morphemes generally are words like, morphemes are combination of phonemes which are not true words, but actually help a true word, help in the formation of true word. For example, a, and, the, prepositions like of, and, on, all of these are morphemes. Now, these kind of morphemes that is used in the English language are called grammatical morphemes, because they help in deciding a grammar or they help in forming a particular kind of a grammar. Now, these words, so when listening, we perceive not only phonemes but different words, and these words actually come from the idea of morphemes, or different morphemes combine together to produce a word. So, when we are listening, we perceive not only phonemes and morphemes, but we also perceive word. Now, what is word? The perception of word is not enough, because from the word we have to extract the meaning of it, and so language, the use of language is not restricted to the understanding of a word. Or what is word, by the way? Word is actually represented by a certain kind of a meaning. So, word represents meaning, and meaning is what we extract from these words. The words are composed of certain symbols which are phonemes, and these phonemes combine to form certain kind of a morpheme. So, phonemes are the basic speech sound. Now, these basic speech sound, they combine together to form morpheme, which is the simplest word, and these simplest words then combine together to form something called word, which has certain kind of a meaning. Now, words are the name of a concept. Words generally are, what are words? Words are names of concepts, and meaning is the concept itself, right. So, the name of a concept is called the word, and the meaning is generally the concept itself or the name of the word or the word name, right. So, this is what the difference is. So, at the level of the word unit, when listening, we perceive not only phonemes, but words. Morphemes are the smallest linguistic unit which carry the meaning. So, this is lie or un or an, on, this kind of words which are grammatical phonemes, they also possess certain meanings. Now, most morphemes are generally word. Grammatical morphemes, for example, words that make sentences grammatically processed differently to consonant words. For example, a, an, on, up, all of these are morphemes which are simple words which have certain meaning, and they are grammatical in nature. Why they are grammatical morphemes? Because they help us processing differently from content words. Of, so for example, book, on the table, book, in the table. Now, look at it, the word on and in decides where it is. So, when the book is on the table, it is on top of the table, but when it says the book is in the table, the book is inside the table. And so, these grammatical phonemes or these grammatical morphemes actually help us decide what meaning is being conveyed with it. Now, content word like table and book, they will not change, but the use of on or in or at or other words, and book, a book, the book kind of a thing. So, the book is that particular book, and book is any book. So, that these particular words actually help you decide meaning or extract meaning from different words. Also, sometimes what happens is certain words may have multiple meaning or ambiguous meaning. For example, look at the word club. Now, this club can have two meanings. It can be in terms of a social organization, or it can also be a striking object. So, club is like a rod, a strike object from through which you strike. Now, the thing is, when these kind of ambiguous words are there, then the meaning is generated, or there are multiple meanings which are available at that point of time. Now, the thing was, since this word club has multiple meaning, linguists were worried about the fact that how do people decide which meaning will be relevant and which meaning will not be relevant, or which meaning will be processed and which meaning will not be processed, or whether both the meanings are available to us. So, if I say I want to join the club, now when I say I want to join the club or he wanted to join the club, what meaning is available and what meaning is not available, and that was what the question was. And to decide that what meaning was perceived or how meaning was generated from words, an experiment was done in which a word, a simple word like he wanted to join the club was told to people. Later on, they were tested with a particular word. They were tested with a particular word, a word was given to them, and they were supposed to announce, or they were supposed to repeat aloud the test word after this word was written. Now, it was found out when the test word matched the meaning of the word club, then people were able to respond faster, or the club, the idea of club or the test word. But when the test word had a meaning or test word had no similarity to both definitions of club, then they were slower in repeating this word, which basically means that when we are reading a word and this word is ambiguous, both the meanings are available to us. The context of the word, for example, I want to join a club, at the moment I say this, at the point when I end the sentence, which is I want to join the club, both the meanings of club, the striking object as well as the social organization is available to me, but the context that I want to join a club where only the social organization is the most meaningful word here, or the most meaningful meaning of the word club which is available here, that will be available, or the second meaning of club will be thrown out, or that will not be used. And so, this experiment actually proves that both the meanings are available while perceiving sentences or extracting meaning from certain sentences. Now, the third unit of language and comprehension at which language can be processed is that the language units and processes, and that is at the level of the sentence. Now, corresponding to parts of thought, prepositions, and allow listeners to extract prepositions from different sentences. Now, at the level of sentence, so I have a basic level which is the phoneme. Now, this phoneme then combines with many other phonemes to produce the word boy, which is the level of word, and then I have at the level of sentence. Now, at the level of sentence, this word is now arranged with certain other words in following certain grammatical rules, following certain rules of producing language to produce a sentence. Now, this sentence is what we are talking about here. So, corresponding to the parts of thought, and so this particular sentence, it relays two thoughts. The boy ate the pie. Now, if I look at it, the sentence can be divided into two different parts. It has two thoughts here. First, the boy, and then the pie, and the third thought is ate. So, then there is an object, or there is a the subject here, not an object. So, this is the subject. So, then the subject in this sentence, how do we process language? In terms of words, then we make from words we make sentences. And if you look at the simple sentence, the boy ate the pie, the subject of this, there are two thoughts actually here, or there are two prepositions which are here. First, the boy, which is the subject in this case, and ate the pie, which is the object. Ate is the verb which says that the boy ate the pie. So, the pie was eaten by the boy, whichever way you look into it. So, who ate the pie? The boy. What did the boy ate? The pie. And so, this is called the predicate, and this is how most sentences are actually defined. So, in order to express meaning, or in order to express certain thoughts, we use sentences, and the sentences can be broken down into two parts, the subject and the predicate. The subject is the one who is doing the action, the predicate is where the action is being held, or it can also be said as subject and objects, and this is the verb. So, if you look into it, this is the word which signifies action, it is called the action verb, and this is called the verb, and so that defines what is being happening. So, then there are two thoughts which are being expressed here. First is there is somebody called the boy, who's a boy, and he is doing something which is eating the pie. So, the question is, the boy did what? He ate a pie. Similarly, who ate the pie? The boy ate the pie, and so thoughts are being sent here, or are being translated here. Prepositions can be further divided into subjects and predicate, that is the description. As I said, if I take another sentence, Audrey has curly hair. Now, if I take this sentence, the subject is Audrey, which is the on which the action is happening, and Audrey has what? This is called the predicate. This is Audrey had curly hairs. Also, another way of dividing this sentence, for example, let us take the sentence, the tailor is asleep. Now, if you look at this, this is the subject, the tailor, who is doing what? He is asleep. Now, if we look at this sentence, or if we look at this sentence, Audrey has curly hairs, this can also be divided into its part, not only a subject as predicate, but also in terms of phrases. For example, the Audrey part is the noun phrase, and has curly hair is part of the verb phrase. Why it is called verb phrase? Now, what is phrase? Phrase is a part of a sentence which makes meaning, but not complete meaning. So, if I say Audrey, it is a phrase, it is a noun phrase. Why it is a noun phrase? Because it makes meaning. Audrey is the name of someone, or in this case has curly hairs. Now, has curly hairs, if I say has curly hairs, it is a part of a sentence which makes complete meaning. Since it is beginning with a verb, it is called the verb phrase, and it although does not tell you somebody has a curly hair, but it says has a curly hair, which basically means that if you add something into it, it has some meaning, it is giving meaning to it. And so, sentences can also be divided not only in terms of subject and predicate, it can also be divided in terms of noun phrase and verb phrase, and within the noun phrase and within the verb phrase we can actually move sentences or move parts of the sentences together, and that is called move or changing the syntactic structure of a sentence, but we will not go into that detail here. So, basically then how do we understand language? Language starts with something called phonemes or phones. The next level is morphemes, which are phonemes combined together to give simple words. Then from the level of the morpheme we had the level of word. Now words are concepts which have meaning, and these words are then formed into sentences. Sentences are prepositions which have ideas into them and which can be communicated between people. So, syntactic analysis, another aspect of language is syntactic analysis. When listening, we divide sentences into its noun phrase, verb phrase, etc., then extract prepositions from the word. The example that we took in the last class or in the last slide, the boy is going to the village. If we look into it, this sentence can be divided into two parts. This is the noun phrase and this is the verb phrase. If we look into it, the boy. So, that is what is, who is going to the village? The boy. What is the boy doing? He is going to the village. Now, within the verb phrase, this is, since go is the word and going is the verb phrase. So, again we can decide this. So, within the verb phrase I will have the verb which is going, and then I will have another noun phrase which is to the market, to the village or market. So, then I can change between. So, within this syntactic structure I can change the idea that who is going. So, he is going. So, is a connector here, and so that kind of a thing is there. And so, there are two, if you look into this kind of a syntactic structure or this sentence, there are two propositions which are here, or there are two ideas which are being floated here. One is that there is a boy, and second is he is going somewhere. Where is he going? To the village. And so, that kind of a thing, or language can do that kind of a thing where it can express ideas using certain kind of symbols. Now, syntax deals with relationships between words in phrases and sentences. Syntax is basically the rule how it should be combined. Now, if I say the boy going to village, it is not correct, or boy going is also not correct. So, certain grammatical rules are used, certain syntactic rules are used, certain rules of usage are used for making propositions, certain ideas float. Now, for example, if I look at the sentence like the green bird ate the red snake. Now, what I am doing here is, when I am saying the green bird ate the red snake, what I am trying to tell you is that there is a green bird and he is the person, or he is the thing which is acting, which is eating. Now, what did he eat? The red snake. Now, it is not the red snake which is eating the green bird, or neither it is the green bird which is being eaten by the red snake. The preposition here, the meaning that I am trying to express here through this sentence is that there is a bird which is green in color and there is a snake which is red in color. So, neither the bird is red in color, neither the snake is green in color, not the snake is eating the bird, not the bird is being eaten by the snake. What is happening here is that there is a green color bird which is actually eating the snake, and so that is called the syntactic analysis. Now, the problems arise when we have sentences in which this syntactic analysis or this kind of a grammar is not ambiguous. For example, look at this sentence. The horse ran past the barn, fell. Now, if you look at the sentences, the horse ran past, the barn fell. Now, this is called the garden part sentence. If you look into it, what is the problem? The problem is we do not know how to process the sentence. As soon as you read the sentence, it says the horse ran past, the barn fell. Now, there is no meaning. So, as you are progressing down the sentence, it makes meaning to you, but then you quickly understand that fell is out of place. And so, what happens is the meaning is not generated, and so in this kind of ambiguous sentences, syntax plays a lot of role, because this is not having the right syntax. So, if you use the right syntax, then this word which is called the garden part sentence, which is called an ambiguous sentence, actually starts make meaning. So, what we do is, initially I would have said the horse is what is the noun phrase and ran past the barn is the verb phrase, but that is not correct, because if I do that, if I put ran past the barn as the verb phrase and the horse as the noun phrase, then the sentence will not be complete, because I have a word which is fell, again a noun, again a verb which is at the end of it. So what I do is, then I put the horse ran past the barn as the noun phrase and fell as the verb phrase, and now it is correct. It is the short form of the sentences, the horse ran past the barn and fell, right. And so this is what sentences are all about, or syntax are all about, and how they make possible understanding of meaning. Now, effects of context. Now, the context in which a particular speech is processed has also a lot to do with perception of ideas, or perception of prepositions which are passed on through a language. If you look into the way understanding a sentence and producing a sentence goes, now when you are producing a sentence, you start at the level of a sentence unit, then you come to the morpheme unit, which is words, and then you come to the phoneme unit when you are producing a sentence. But when you are understanding a sentence, you start at the level of the phoneme level, you start understanding or hearing what the words are saying, and then make meaning out of it, and then finally derive the preposition that is being passed on to. So basically, context has a lot of work or a lot of role to play into how language is processed. Context is important in comprehension and production for setting the scene of giving insights into a speaker's intention. For example, background knowledge of a particular sentence, a background knowledge of where the sentence is coming from, has a lot of role to play in terms of what ideas are being processed or what ideas are being put forward. For example, if I ask you the question, can you pass the potato, and if I am sitting with you in a dinner table or other people on a dinner table, and the question is, can you pass the potato, it is not the question of whether I have the ability to pass the potato or do I have the strength, the physical strength to pass the potato. The question being asked here is that, please can you pass the potato. The question is whether he can pass the potato, not in terms of the strength, physical strength, but please pass the potato is what the meaning of the sentence is. But if somebody has a sling on it, or somebody has a fracture in his hand, and the same question is being asked, can you pass the potato. Now in this case, the person who is putting the word is actually questioning the strength of the person. Can you pass the potato actually means whether you have the ability to pass the potato from one place to another. Similarly, in the production of language also, the context has a lot of part to play. So in terms of comprehension, I just showed to you how meaning differs in terms of what the context is, or in what background the language is being produced. Similarly, if I ask the question, where is Empire State Building? Now the answer to that will depend upon where I am. Now if I am in Seattle, I will say it is in New York, or if I am in Europe, I will say it is in the US. But when I am in the United States, in Seattle, I will say it is in New York. But if I am in New York, and if you ask the same question to me, where is Empire State Building, particularly I will say 33 and 66 West. That's the I don't know if that's the address of Empire State Building, but that's the number that I'll give you. I'll give you the exact number. So depending on where I am, in which context I am, that will decide what type of speech I make and what type of comprehension can be generated, or what kind of information is being transferred. So context has a lot of role to play. Now language and communication. What is the neural basis of languages? Now there are two regions of the brain, one is called the Broca area and the other is called the Wernicke area, which is responsible for producing languages, or which is responsible for comprehending language. Now any damage to this area, both are in the left hemisphere of the brain, and so any damage to these areas will actually be inhibiting language. So two regions in the left hemisphere are critical for language production or comprehension: Broca's area, which is the posterior part of the frontal lobe, and Wernicke area, which is the temporal region. Now damage to either of these areas leads to specific kinds of aphasia, breakdown in the language. For example, in Broca's aphasia, so if the Broca area is damaged, what will happen is a disruption of the syntactic stage will happen. So you will be able to produce language, but then you will not be able to understand the syntax of it. You will be able to flawlessly produce words, but then extracting meaning is difficult. But if you have Wernicke aphasia, disruption at the word level and concept level will happen. So you will not be able to understand what is the concept. So I will produce speech perfectly, but what is the meaning of the speech I will not be able to generate. In this case, what will happen is disruption in the syntactic level. So, I will at the level of grammar there will be a problem. So, I will be able to speak, but there will be several grammatical flaws. So, I understand the meaning, but I do not know how to put it together. And so, these two types of aphasias are there. This is not only these two aphasias, there are many other aphasias or damage to brain regions which can lead to problems in language formation. Now, another question is in terms of development of language, whether it is acquired. Now, phonemes and combination of phonemes. Now, children, it is whether phonemes are acquired or how it is acquired, what is acquired and what is not. So, phonemes are, it is believed that phonemes are acquired, and so most children actually when they start, small children when they are born, they can speak any language that they want, right, or they can learn any language that they want. And so, by the age of 3 to 6 months they produce speech sounds which are similar to most languages in the world. But then what happens is, as you grow older, as you become 6 months of age, what happens is you start producing certain phonemes in your language and forgetting certain other phonemes, and this is what is actually happening. So, children are able to discriminate among different sounds that corresponds to different phonemes. During the first year, children learn which phonemes are relevant for their particular language. Over the next few years, learn how to combine these phonemes together. So, initially when they are born, they can produce any kind of phoneme which is there, any kind of speech sound which is there, for example, ba, da and that kind of a thing. But then as they grow in age, they start learning only the phonemes from their language, and later on they start understanding and mixing these phonemes together to produce language. Words and concepts. And now, right from the 1.5 years to 2.5 years of age, children start combining these phonemes together to produce words. So, initially they produce simple words, and then they start understanding that these simple words are not true. So, they start doing an overextension. For example, let us say doggy, they have learned the word doggy. So, what they start doing is they start doing something called over justification. So, they take this doggy and try applying it to cats and so on and so forth, and later on they realize that this is not possible, this kind of thing is not possible, and they start narrowing down or understanding the grammars of it. Now, later on at 2.5 years of age or around 3 years of age, they start making simple sentences not with grammar. For example, dad, hat, where kind of a sentence, and then as you progress early, by 4 years of age, you understand the grammar as well as the sentence as well as the phoneme and morphemes. So, when children start speaking around 1 year of age, first use words that relate to family concept, example family name, animal name and so on and so forth. Around 1.5 years of age, children use around 25 words, and by 6 years children use around 15,000 different words. From primitive to complex sentences, between the age of 1.5 to 2.5 years, children acquire sentences units, starts with combining single words into 2-word utterances and rapidly progressing to more complex sentences to express prepositions and more clearly. So, as I said, initially what happens is children develop single sentences and they start extending the concept of single sentences to other sentences as well. And so, by a process of learning and conditioning, they start understanding that this extension is not working. So, using doggy for a cat or a cow is not really working, and so this what they do is they start learning names of these different animals, and then initially they start combining these names together to form very simple sentences as Jake, eat, dad, go kind of a thing. Later on they start understanding the grammar of it, of how to combine it all together to form simple sentences, and that is how the progression really works. Learning processes. So, how is learning then taking place in children? It is through the process of imitation and conditioning. Now, possibilities that children learn by imitating adults, imitation, or by being rewarded for producing sentences correctly and punished for mistakes, which is conditioning. So, children are known to learn sentences or language through two process. One is imitation. Now, in imitation what happens is a parent actually shows a particular object to a child saying that this is telephone. So, telephone, and the child imitates that. So, one way of learning for children is imitating parents when they talk or when they show something to children, and that is how they develop. But that may not be the only way in which children actually learn language. The other way in which they learn language is through conditioning. Now, in conditioning what happens is a parent actually gives you a reward, or the children a reward when they produce the correct sentences. And so, another word of learning is, for example, they show the small child a dog, and when the dog says it is a dog, he is rewarded, and that makes him learn that this is a dog. Or say simple sentences, for example, watch, they show the watch, and when the child says it is a watch, then he is rewarded, otherwise he is actually corrected. And so, there are two ways of learning, one is through imitation, the other is through conditioning. Problem with these possibilities is that they focus on specific utterances. The problem is that although these two possibilities of copying or imitating or conditioning can be one of the reasons of how children learn language, but the problem is that these possibilities are, they focus on specific utterances. How do children overextend concepts, or how do children produces complex sentences that sometimes even adults do not say, so some sentences which adults do not express, how do children learn those kind of sentences. So, if it is imitation or conditioning, they should be dependent on the parent or learning new words for that matter. How do the children produce this matter? So, it is not only simple imitation or conditioning which make children learn, they also do something called hypothesis testing. They also learn through some other methods through hypothesis testing. So, what is hypothesis testing? In which children appear to form hypothesis about a rule of language, test it and retain it if it works. So, what children then tend to do is that they make certain hypothesis about where a sentence would go or where a part of a sentence would go, and then they keep on adding this. So, cow moo, dog moo, so moo is the word, or dog bark, cat bark, that kind of a thing, and they test this hypothesis with everything. Man goes, dog goes, or he worked, they ate it. That kind of a sentence they start using, and then they slowly realize that ed is not something which is to be added with every kind of a noun or every kind of a verb, and later on they start correcting. So, one of the ways that they learn is through hypothesis testing. Now, hypotheses are generated according to a few operating principles, example, paying attention to word endings, looking for prefixes and suffixes that indicate change in meaning and avoid exceptions. So, what they do is they start playing around with word endings, they start playing around with certain suffixes and prefixes. For example, animate, so inanimate, unanimate, so untimely, so they will use the un in some other word, for example, unanimate kind of a thing, and so they extend this way this particular thing, this particular thought, this particular word ending, and start making sentences. So, the ones for which they are rewarded, they learn, the ones which they are not rewarded, they will leave it or they will let it go. So, innate factors, the richness of innate knowledge. One indicator for this richness is children in all cultures seem to go through similar process in acquiring certain languages. So, basically there are certain innate factors which have also been proposed, and it comes from the idea that people or children in all cultures, they go through certain similar process of acquiring language. So, also the idea that there are certain critical periods, for example, first months of life are critical period for learning phonemes for the native language, and it is harder to learn sound systems for a second language later in life. Now, it is found that when an adult start learning a later language or a second language in a later life, it becomes very difficult for them, but if children learn them, where it is very easy because phoneme learning is very easy for them. Now, this system says that language learning is actually innate in children. Indirect evidence for critical periods of language acquisition is from children who experience social isolation. So, if put a child into a social isolation, this child will actually never produce a phoneme or never produce higher phonemes or higher sentences. Critical period for learning syntax, studies of deaf people have said or suggested that there are certain critical periods for learning syntax. Can another species learn human language? Now, that is another interesting question. Other species have communication systems, but most argue that these are qualitatively different from our own language system. Now, a lot of other species, for example, gorillas or monkeys or apes have been trained, and there are several experiments which have been done with apes, and it has been found that these apes actually learn language, but they cannot learn the sophistication. So, at the best there was another monkey study which was done where this monkey actually learned certain 1500 to 2000 words, I think 2000 or 6000 words. They were able to express sign language, but they were not able to express ideas like a small children did. And also it took many years for this monkey to learn this, whereas small children or children by the age of 1 or 2 years or 3 years, they develop this particular language. So, the idea that other species can also learn language is also questionable. Now, let us take a recap of what we did today. So, what we did today is I introduced to you the idea of what is language and what is the different forms of or different sections of language or different stratas of language, and how does language actually help us in studying human behavior. So, what language does is it helps us in communicating and transferring ideas from or transferring propositions from one person to another or one system to another, and that is how it actually helps us in understanding or in studying human behavior. So, up till we meet next time and continue with language and thinking processes, it is goodbye from here.